Again, that's 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. This particular scripture is a really, really personal letter to Timothy. I'm not going to get into the really heart-wrenching scriptures because I don't think I could bear it. No, really. But it's a really important section that he gives to his son, spiritual son, Timothy. Again, 2 Timothy chapter 4, beginning verse 1. I'm going to read and then we'll go ahead and pray. Paul says, "In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead, in view of his appearing in his kingdom, I give you this charge or command. Preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. But you keep your head in all situations. Endure hardship. Do the work of an evangelist. Discharge all the duties of your ministry. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering." And the time has come for my departure. Father, I didn't think it was going to get this emotional this quick. But this really is an important section. Paul pours his heart out to Timothy. Instead of complaining of the situation he's in, he gives Timothy one last charge. And I pray that today that we would take this to heart, that Paul, even though he's speaking to a young pastor, that we wouldn't shy away or turn off that dial, that spiritual dial in us, because you really have something to say to us through this particular charge, Lord, especially in the times that we live in today. I pray that if anyone here does not know you and just happen to stumble across, or someone has invited them over, I pray that tonight will be that day where they hear your word knocking at their hearts and that they just come running to you. Father, we love you and we praise you. Amen. This particular scripture reminds me of another scripture in the Old Testament, in 1 Kings chapter 2, where King David is about to pass from this life to the next. He gave his young son, Solomon, who's in his early 20s, also a charge, a command. And he said, King David said to Solomon, "I'm about to go the way of all the earth," he said. "So be strong, show yourself a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in his ways and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and requirements, as written in the law of Moses, so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go." Again, what a similar passage, huh? King David is about to pass, takes his young, again, Solomon, his son, and he gives him a charge to be a man. I really believe that the Lord today is saying that to all of you. Be a man, be a woman, and here's the charge, and we're going to find out what that charge is tonight. But let me give you a quick background of this letter. Paul was writing, as I mentioned before, writing this letter to Timothy, a young pastor, and Paul at the time was in prison in Rome. This is the second time there, and he was awaiting his execution. Interestingly enough, he's not complaining. You know, he's still thinking about ministry. Paul, you couldn't veer his attention away from anything else but ministry. That was Paul all the time. And Paul, again, wrote this letter to encourage him in his ministry, Timothy was in Ephesus, left there by Paul to take care of some things. He was doing some really difficult issues there. There were some real, active, false teachers there, and Paul gave him instructions on how to deal with these things. There was a decaying world. The atmosphere was truly, truly corrupt, truly decaying. In fact, very similar to today's culture, today's society. And then he went on ahead in chapter 3, 2 Timothy chapter 3, he goes and he describes what the future is going to look like for Timothy. The truth is that a lot of what Paul said to Timothy in chapter 3 was actually happening during that time. And I like to read it to you guys because it really sets the stage for what we're going to read in chapter 4. So in 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul says this regarding the last days. Pastor Ron likes to say the last hours, and I truly believe that we are in the last hours. And Paul says to Timothy, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, and without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power, have nothing to do with them. Isn't that an incredible description of today's world that we live in? It's incredible. And then to refute this, Paul tells Timothy, this is what you need. And he says in that same chapter, all scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. He says, I want you to base your ministry, your life, around God's word. That's the only way that you're going to live life in this corrupt world that we live in. And so in chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, Paul says this, in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead, and in view of his appearing in his kingdom, I give you this charge. And before we go on, let's take a look at this one word that I really like. In the presence of God. Paul was telling Timothy, when you serve God, when you are discharging your duties, your ministry duties, you're doing this in the presence of God. So many times we end up thinking that what we do for Christ has no significance. But if we keep in mind that we're doing what we do here in the presence of God, that brings at least for me, so much significance. God is watching everything I'm doing. And that to me brings comfort, because that means that I don't have to try to impress anyone on the outside. I don't have to worry about what they think about me or what she's doing or what that other person is doing. Instead, I'm doing this in the presence of God, and only God sees. And you know what? I'm okay with that. And Paul's telling Timothy, listen, I understand where you're at. I understand the circumstances you're living in. I understand how corrupt and how terrible this culture that you live in. But know that what you're doing is significant. And you're doing this in the presence of God, who will judge the living and the dead. Everyone will stand before God. Everyone that it's ever lived, that will live, everyone will stand before God and give an account of their life that they've lived with him, and those lives that lived apart from him. Those whose life were lived out for Jesus, their work will be evaluated and rewarded. We get those scriptures in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 10. Christians will stand before the bema seat of Christ, and he is going to reward us according to our motives, why we did the things that we did. Did we do them because we loved God, because it was the only thing that we lived for? Or did we do it for other reasons? That doesn't mean that we're not saved, but that means that all the service, all the things that you've done will go up in smoke. And then there will be those that have lived without God, without Christ in their lives, and they will continue to live without God and without Christ in their lives for all of eternity in hell. And so Paul says this, he goes, he's watching, he's going to evaluate, he's going to reward you for the things that you do, for the service that you render to the Lord. And he also continues in that same verse, and he says, in view of his appearing in his kingdom, Paul even then was still expecting Jesus' return that day. What a purifying thought that is, isn't it? Huh? Having that anticipation of being with Jesus make us want to be ready, serving him now, pleasing him now. If we have that engraved in our hearts and in our minds, that at any time he's going to show up, just like, my kids. I've got 2 kids. Now they're obviously grown. But I would tell them, I said, I need you to clean that room, and it better be nice and spick and span. I said, and I'm going to come up. When are you coming? I said, I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to show up, because I don't know what you're going to end up doing. You're going to wait for the last minute to start working on it. And let me tell you something. I'd peek in that room, and the room was clean within 5 minutes, because they had no idea, And it's the same way. If we keep that in mind, if we truly believe that, it's a purifying thought. It's a purifying thing that happens in us. We know that we're not going to end up doing this, getting into this mess or that sin. And Paul was constantly just emblazed in his heart. And here's the charge, verse 2. He says, preach the word. And I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. Because there's just so much to unpack here. A lot of times, we read through these scriptures and we think this only applies to, Timothy, a young pastor or a preacher. But that word preach means to herald, to announce, to proclaim, to set it forth, to deliver the truth, to make it known. In other words, you're declaring what God has said. And let me tell you something, that to me is it relieves me of all pressure, because I don't have to share my opinion with anyone. As long as you know God's word, all you have to do is just say what God says and just kind of back away. Say, hey, that's what God said. And I like doing it. I don't like confrontation. I might look like a type of guy that likes to, kind of beat up on people, but I'm not that guy. Okay, I'm not that guy. Okay? I'm a soft, gentle giant, I don't like confrontation. And so whenever I share Christ with people, I'm like, this is what God's word says. Pastor Barry, he was our founding principal here at the school. I remember him coming up to and doing a chapel for the kids. And he had some scriptures that he wanted a student to read. And so he asked a particular student to read it. And the kid began to read, really timid, shy, and just kind of stumbling over the words and without lack of confidence. And if you knew Pastor Barry can get a bit passionate. And he said, that's God's word. That's God's word. Read it. You don't have to know what it said. Just read it. He said it, and he said, he said it. I mean, just read it with conviction. That's what he said, and he was just going on. And I get it. And I understood what he meant. God said it. You don't have to try to convince people. You don't have to somehow add anything to it. It's God's word. And see, that's the thing. You can proclaim, you can herald God's word, but you have to know what God's word says. And I love this church. And I love Pastor Ron. And I'm glad that the Lord brought me here because of the emphasis of God's word in this church. I don't have to worry about giving an opinion on life's matters. I can always go back to God's word and say, this is what God's word says about this and about that. And so often, we like to give our opinion. And I don't want to sound rough when I say this, but can you speak the world into existence? Can you heal the blind? Can you heal the lame? Can you raise people from the, can you raise yourself up from the dead? Because if you can, then obviously your opinion does count. But the truth is that it doesn't. And that's why we need to adhere to God's word. There's so many things going on in this world right now, so many truths, and I put them in quotation because that's not it. It bothers me. It bothers me to hear even Christians give their opinions on certain matters when God is very clear about these things. Just recently, and by the way, I like to give examples, stories. It's not really stories, but examples of my own life, because it helps you and it helps me know how to apply these things. That's one of the things that I've learned about Pastor Ron. When I compare him to other teachers, he helps you know the how. Okay, I understand what you're saying, but how is this applied to me? How do I put this into practice? And that's always stuck with me. Anyway, just recently, I'm not a big social media guy, but just recently I ended up reading something on social media. And it was a tragic incident, of a tragic death that shouldn't have happened. Person died. And a Christian went ahead and commented on this tragedy. Said some really nice things, and towards the end, this is what really kind of bothered me. It says, he's at peace. There's no more pain. And we have absolutely no idea about this person's life. And so I brought it up to my high school kids. And I'm like, it bothers me. And I kind of just shared with them, it kind of bothers me. Why do you think it bothers me? And I asked them, I said, why do you think it bothers me? And the kids would come. One of the kids said, well, one of the kids made a comment and says, well, I think they were just trying to, wish for the best. I'm like, I get that, but why do you think it's wrong? And then one of the students said, was he a Christian? And I'm like, that's exactly right. Why would you give your opinion? Why would you try to temporarily comfort someone with something nice, and you completely disregard God's basic truth, that there's only one way? And so again, when I share Christ with people or teach, I apply these things to myself. I don't try to give my opinion, because my opinion doesn't count at all. Again, it's God's word that counts here. And so we, as Christians, not just the pastors, but we as Christians, we need to announce it, proclaim, deliver this truth. But we have to know it. And continuing in this verse, he says, be prepared in season and out of season. So know God's word, and you will always have God's word to proclaim, whether you're under favorable conditions or not. But as Christians, that's what we need to do. We need to be studiers of God's word. And Pastor Ron, and I like to use this word on him, I don't think he likes it very much, harping always on that. And I love it, and I say it in a positive way. Okay? You do. You have to know what God's word says in order for you to be ready when those difficult times come. I love it I love when a person shows up. I didn't ask permission to share this, but I think he'd be okay with it. A.J. Tamayo, I remember on a Friday night, I was standing up here with the rest of the pastors and their wives from pastor's class, and this young guy, A.J. Tamayo, comes up and he says, I'm ready. I'm ready to receive Christ. And I'm like, this is perfect. And I got the chance to share with them, and everything was yes, 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 yes. All right, let's do it. And I love that. But not every time, but you won't have things like this all the time. Okay? You will have really awkward and uncomfortable situations in life where you know you need to proclaim God's word. Recently at the gym, I'm pretty blind. I take off my glasses, I can't see anyone. And so when I'm at the gym, I take off my glasses because, get a little sweaty and, my glasses fall off. So I had him, and so I had this guy that was maybe about 4 feet away from me, and I thought he was staring at me. And so I stared back at him. Again, I'm not a confrontational guy. But I stared back at him, and just to kind of make sure that I was seeing what I was seeing, but he looked like he was staring at me. And so I'm like this, and I just kept looking at him, thinking, and I'm looking at this guy, and finally I grabbed my glasses, I don't know where I had them, put them on, and sure enough, he glanced at me. I noticed he glanced, but he was watching TV. And man, it was so awkward. Here's this guy, sweaty guy, just pumping iron, and there I am, we're staring each other down, I'm thinking. And I immediately apologized to the guy. And I said, listen, I am so sorry. I said, listen, I'm blind. And I explained the situation. I got a chance to share Christ with them at that moment. But we need to take those opportunities. And so oftentimes we think that, the time is not right. I'm awkward. I'm not uncomfortable. I don't know enough. We'll get to know enough. I'm just going to leave that to someone else. Redeem the time. Take the opportunity. Be ready in and out of season, regardless of what the circumstances are. Regardless if it makes you feel uncomfortable or not. Regardless if you're at peace or not. The charge is to preach, to herald, to communicate God's word to people. And continuing in this verse, it says, preach the word, be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instructions. Correct. Let's go ahead and take that word, correct. That happens when God's word is proclaimed. In fact, all of these things happen when God's word is proclaimed. Correct, rebuke, encourage. The Bible says in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12 and 13, it says, for the word of God is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to the dividing of soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitude of the heart. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. That's what God's word does. It corrects us. Mom Paula says she likes to be convicted. I don't like to be convicted. But the truth is that there is a fruit that comes from conviction. There's something that happens, right? You're convicted, and if you're a Christian that loves the Lord and that wants to be more like Christ, then you say, Lord, change me. Change my direction here. And that's what we need to do, right? Not only in our own lives, but also with people. We see something happening, and with love and compassion and gentleness, Paul says it in Galatians, with gentleness, correct. And then it also says rebuke, or in other words, warn. It's not that we it's not, the word rebuke here, we often, and I came from a Pentecostal background as a kid. I wasn't saved, but those were the churches that I was dragged to go to. The people, standing up and shouting and rebuking this demon and that demon, whatever. That's not what Paul's talking about here. He's talking about warning those. Okay? When the word is taught, it will warn us of our behavior, of our thought process, of our speech. Again, just recently, and we were talking about a month and a half ago, I was at the gym. I don't go very far. Church, gym, home. I live a very boring life. And this one guy comes in, a young 30-year-old guy comes in, and he starts talking to me about, he knows I'm a Christian. He knows I'm a teacher here at the school. And he was telling me about his father who had 4 wives and his, and his brother who was homosexual. But he was using all kinds of crude and just really derogatory words describing his family members. But he was calling himself a Christian, and he was saying, he was quoting scriptures, and I'm thinking to myself, this guy's not saved at all. Okay. And so, I try to talk to him, a little bit, and, kind of left that conversation thinking, man, I really don't, there's something going on here. Anyway, 2 weeks go by, he shows up again. And again, just starts talking to me, and he's just cursing. I mean, he just, filthy. And finally I said, hey, you and I, we're friends, aren't we? And he goes, yeah. And I went ahead and prefaced our conversation with this. He goes, and you believe that the Bible is actually God's word? And he goes, yeah, of course. He says, yeah, I believe God's word. He goes, well, the Bible says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, do not let any unwholesome word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification. Also in Ephesians chapter 5, I told him, nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk or coarse joking, but rather thanksgiving. I said, that's what God's word says. And then I also told him, in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20, he goes, you and I, we're ambassadors for Christ. We're representatives of Christ. And right now, when you're cursing and doing these things, you're not representing Christ. He goes, well, I do that because I'm around a lot of kids, and I figured that I needed to relate. I'm saying, you're compromising everything. You're a representative of Christ. If in fact you are a Christian, you're a representative of Christ, and that's not who he is. You're preaching something else. I said, listen, I'm going to leave that up to you, and you do what, but I'm telling you, you're misrepresenting Christ. And he hasn't talked to me since. But that's what needs to happen. And you do that because you love people. And let me tell you something, I love that guy. I love him. I like him. But I can't just let these things slip by, letting him think that he's okay with his behavior, his talk. And if he truly is a Christian, then he's going to come around and he's going to say, Lord, forgive me. If he truly believes that that the Bible is God's word, he's going to come around. And then he says, encourage. The word of God is encouraging. Before coming to Christ, I would look at God's word and I was like, it's just nothing but doom and gloom there, especially the Old Testament. But really, it is encouraging. I love when I get, you girls have, what is it, sister, the secret sisters, there you go. We need to have something like that, But, the girls are always getting these little, packages with verses and things like that. When Shell gets them, and the first thing I do is I read the verse. I like it. I'm like, man, that's so nice. I've gotten things like that from other guys, and I like it. But it's so encouraging because, again, this is what God said. Like Pastor Ray, this is what God said. Is it real to you? How much he loves you? How much he cares for you? Is it real to you that he is in control? Even in this dying world, this corrupt world, he cares for you? It's so encouraging. And I think that, especially, again, in the world that we live in, find encouragement in God's word. You can't find it in anything else. I'm sure that you've thumbed through the Psalms or Proverbs and it's like, so refreshing, isn't it? Let's see if tonight that'll happen. Maybe you have been backsliding. Maybe you've just kind of been grown cold to God's word. Other things have taken priority in your life. And you find yourself, again, cold. You find yourself sort of indifferent to God's word. And maybe after hearing some of these things, you think, man, that's exactly what I want. I want to be refreshed with God's word. Guys, God's word is refreshing. It's like a cold lemonade in 113 degrees San Antonio summer. I'm not looking for a tour this summer. 15 years ago, I ended up, my wife and I went, and my kids ended up going to Puerto Rico. And my Johnny, who's now 26, was sharing Christ with his uncle, Omar. And he was, Omar's a nice guy, the nicest guy. Pastor Ron says, he's got Terry, he's the nicest kid. It's so difficult for people like them to come to Christ. And again, Omar is just the nicest guy, just a sweetheart. And Johnny was sharing Christ with him. And so he came up to me that evening. He goes, "Yeah, I shared Jesus with him." What did he say? He says, "Thank you." He smiled, whatever. I said, "Keep at it. Yeah, keep at it. Keep talking to him." And he did. And throughout the years, he would call him or whatever. Well, my brother Omar ended up giving his life to the Lord about 1.5 years ago. And one of the first things he did was to call Johnny and and says, that conversation we had when you were 11 years old? And Johnny's like, "Yeah, I never forgot it." That is encouraging that God's word is going to do exactly what it was sent out to do. You guys know the verse, Isaiah chapter 55. "My word that goes out from my mouth, it will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it." You find so many things in God's word that are encouraging to you. Grab a hold of these things. And you'll see that life will be enjoyable, even in the midst, again, of the culture, of the society that we live in today. And Paul continues in the same verse. He says, "With great patience and careful instruction, patiently keep on teaching." Again, just like my brother Omar. "We're not to abandon those who are slow in responding, but we're to keep on explaining, answering questions, clarifying, applying the gospel to specific situations." That's all teaching. And that's, as Christians, that's what we need to continue to do. When I would bring certain situations to Pastor Ron, regarding my family, especially my kids, Pastor Ron would always tell me, that's a teaching lesson. That's a lesson right there, Juan. He goes, "Make sure that you take advantage of these situations and teach them." Guys, that's what we're called to do. You might not be standing here in front of a pulpit or teaching chapel, but at home, it is your responsibility to teach God's word to your family. And and always use God's word as a backdrop for all situations, for all circumstances. You will have those answers. Verse 3, we need to hurry up. Verse 3, "For the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine." At its core, men have a dislike for the truth because it exposes a sin in them that they might be healed. That's what sound doctrine does. It heals. It continues to do so. But here's the thing. These people that Paul was talking about, these false teachers in Timothy's day, they didn't even want to hear anything. Isn't it true also with our friends, family, people, when we share Christ with them, when we bring up God's word to them, they don't even want to lend an ear. But your responsibility is to continue to share. That's it. That's the only weapon that we have there. It's God's word. And instead, okay, it says here, "And instead they will look to others." I'm blind over here. And instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will look to others who will teach them what they want to hear. Shell and I, we've done some counseling before, and it's incredible. At times, I remember particularly one particular couple that wanted to counsel with us, and we met up with them about 5 times, 5 Sundays in a row, and I tried to tell them the same thing, over and over, using a different angle, and they just wouldn't receive it. In fact, what they would say would be, I know. And then they would go back to explaining how she or he hurt her and how they were offended, blah, blah, blah. And then finally one day they came up to me and goes, you know what, we're going to go ahead and try out so-and-so, another pastor, so-and-so. And that's what happens. Sadly, that particular couple is no longer together, and it's a tragedy. And that's what happens when you don't adhere to God's word. You're gonna go to others that will tell you what you want to hear. Stay close to God's word and do what he says. Listen, even if it hurts, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable, because God has the best interest for you. Verse 4, they will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. Anything that anyone adheres to or believes or practices apart from God's word is a myth. And there's such a long list of things, right, that we can come up with, from evolution, homosexuality, the fact that you can, gender is fluid, that you can, it just goes on and on and on. The belief that somehow the United States is somehow going to save the world over, that's all a myth. And that's what happens when you step away from God's word, when you adhere to God's word. You begin to believe all kinds of different things, and they sound good, right? These are attractive lies. These are fantasies. Stick to God's word, and even if people don't want to hear these things, even and they get upset because they contradict their philosophies. And instead, they just want to run off and do whatever their carnal desires want them to do. Verse 5. But you keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry. But you keep your head. In other words, exercise self-control. Oftentimes we see a family member, a loved one, just making terrible decisions. We want to go out there and grab a hold of them and just shake them. Again, you look at our world, we look at our government, we look at our institution, we look at our schools and what they're doing and we want to go out there and sort of overturn some tables, right? Some of us think a little more than just overturning tables. But Paul would tell Timothy, you need to keep your head. You need to exercise self-control. I know this bothers you. I know this is frustrating. I know that this world, this corrupt world, is clawing and gnawing at you. But you need to stay focused on the mission, on the charge, on the command. And that is for you to continue to preach the word. I love when Pastor Ron, that's all he does. And I love the fact that he doesn't veer away from that. He doesn't get political. He doesn't do this or take one side or the other. He proclaims God's word, and that is exactly what we all need to do. Proclaim his word. Keep your head. Okay? And he says also, endure hardship. He also said this in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3. He says, endure hardship with us like a good soldier of Christ Jesus. As Christians, we know that that life at times isn't easy. So far, I think we've had it okay. Again, you look at Christians all over the world, and again, comparing ourselves to them, we have it really good. But the truth is that the time is coming where things are going to get really tight with us. We're going to be pressed to make compromise. We're going to be pressed to give in. And instead, as a good soldier, we ought to endure these hardships. As long as we continue to stay close, like Pastor Ron says it all the time, to Jesus, to His Word, adhering to His Word, we're going to be okay. Do the work of an evangelist. This doesn't just go for like Billy Graham's or Pastor Ron or anyone else that teaches the Bible. This is for all of us, evangelists. Just sharing the gospel with people. Pastor Ron has been using this word quite a bit now. He says it's got to be organic. I like organic. I like natural. In other words, your conversations with people when you're evangelizing should be natural. Again, I gave you a few incidents there at the gym where I just share Jesus with people. There are times where I talk about something. Paula does the same thing in restaurants. Pastor Ron does the same thing. And I look at him and say, hey, man, I love those shoes. And we start talking, and immediately there's an opening. But you have to look for those openings. You see, redemption is God's baby. And He's looking for an opportunity for you to say yes so that that opportunity presents itself. Our job is to disseminate the word. In Matthew chapter 13, Mark chapter 4, Luke chapter 8, Jesus gives the parable of the sower. You and I are sowers. And we ought to disseminate the word liberally, not concerning ourselves what ground it falls on. Our job is to share Christ with people. And in verse 6, here ending, Paul, it gets really personal. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. This drink offering first appears in Genesis chapter 35, verse 14, when Jacob went ahead and poured out a drink offering before the Lord as a sacrifice. David Guzik said, he gives an example of a Roman life, and he says, the day is done, the meal is just about over, and I'm being poured out unto God. I don't know if you guys have seen the movies, the Lord of the Rings movies, or read those books. The last movie, Return of the King, there's a particular battle scene where the city has been completely overrun by the enemy, and Gandalf, the White, the good guy, the wizard, the White Wizard, is held up behind doors, and on the other side of the other door is a big old troll trying to get in, and soldiers are trying to keep the door from opening up. And there's a little guy, Pippin, who is deathly afraid. You can see in his face, he's just deathly afraid. I mean, everything's overrun. It's chaos, pandemonium. They're all going to die. And Pippin says, I didn't think it would end this way. And Gandalf says, end? He says, no, the journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. The gray rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver, glass, and then you see it. And then Pippin says, what? He goes, Gandalf, see what? And then Gandalf says, white shores and a beyond, a far green country under a swift sunrise. Isn't it nice? And Pippin says, well, that isn't so bad. As beautiful as this little piece here is, Paul knew what was awaiting him there. It was Jesus. It was heaven. He talks about his crowns, but all he wanted to do was see Jesus, the one who saved him. And I really believe, guys, that, again, in this day and age that we live, that is our number one charge. That is the only thing that we really need to focus on in these last hours. And that is to herald, to communicate, to announce, to proclaim God's word. There's nothing else. You can't give your opinion. It's only God's word. And as good soldiers, we must endure hardship. But take heed. There's been so many that have gone before us, and they said, oh, it's so much worth it. So worth it. Will you pray with me?